Hi, yeah. So for the final session of this talk, I would like to do two things. So first of all, I would like to first take a step back and start by talking about, well, what is dance in the first place? What is special about it, and perhaps what is not so special about it, and why we should be interested in the visual neuroaesthetics. And then the second thing I'd like to do is, and I'll do that by first doing that, and then I'll talk about a research project that we've recently completed, which looks directly at the role of synchrony in live dance performance. And then finally, I want to take following on Ed's suggestion, I'm going to take a bit of a leap, and I'm going to try to think about how we can use those findings from the study of dance to maybe think about how we can get to a more general idea about how performances, live performances in general, are appreciated, and how we can move towards greater integration, perhaps between the visual and the performance, study of the visual and the performing arts. And on that note, I think if there's one thing that I want you to take home from this talk is I think that the distinction that is implicit to a lot of our research on I do visual arts and I do visual neuroaesthetics and I'm more interested in the performing arts really is an artificial one and doesn't necessarily exist out there. And to illustrate that, so this is work from the choreographer from the company Neue Tanz, which I actually worked with for like 2 years. And this is a piece that actually premiered here in Frankfurt at the Muson-Turm in 2009. And you see there a younger version of me, very much to the right in tutu. And so what's interesting about that company is that the choreographer himself is actually a trained painter who worked or who studied with Oskar Kokoschka in Salzburg, and then studied photography at the Folkwang University and moved into the performing arts, and ever since now does work which all of his choreographies take place in the white cube, as you see here. And there's also very clear references to, for example, Degas here. We're also carrying guns, so there's also references to mass shootings and gun control, but it is the 21st century, so it's perfectly fine to combine ballet with the politics of gun control, I think. But since we're in Frankfurt, I think we should really be starting with William Forsyth, who has been running the Ballet Frankfurt here from 1984 to 2004, and then his own company was based in Frankfurt as well until 2015. And I want to show you a little excerpt from a piece called One Flat Thing Reproduced, just to have a look at what dance, just to have a look at one form that dance might take. Let's hope we have sound. No, we don't. Oh. Ah, yeah, there we go. It's very soft. Can we make this louder? No, it doesn't respond. Oh. Okay. Right. So there's clearly a lot going on here. So how can we possibly even start to begin to sort of understand and approach all of the things that are going on here? And I think the first thing when we want to approach this scientifically is we should be perhaps at least thinking about, but what do we mean when we say we study the neuroaesthetics of dance and choreography? And if we just look into the Oxford English Dictionary, it gives us a very straightforward definition of what dance is. And according to the Oxford English Dictionary, dance is a series of steps and movements that match the speed and rhythm of a piece of music. And we already see just from this work alone that this perhaps work doesn't get us very far, but at the same time, I think it's a very important definition because I think it probably is the definition that most of the general population holds. So if we study the neuroaesthetics of dance, we need to be aware that this is what most people expect, which will affect certainly the kind of judgments that we'll get. A perhaps more appropriate and certainly very common definition of dance is that it's about expressive movement or thinking with movement. And this definition really comes from ultimately German Expressionism and from people like Rudolf Laban or Mary Wigman, for example. And here the idea really is that dance is defined by the fact that it communicates things that we cannot express through words. So it's captured in Pina Bausch's famous words that dance begins where language ends. Yeah? And since we're talking about Pina Bausch, I promised Jörg to show a video, so I'm going to show a video of that too. The sound takes away from it a little bit, but it's not happening. That shouldn't. I have a link here, which I want to play. There. This is not very nice. Let's see. I have been doing this properly. I think I need to mirror my displays, otherwise I lost my mouse now. There. There we are. Right. Let's try this again. Oh. No, this is not what we wanted. This is what we want. This is what we're getting there. Sorry. I never use YouTube videos in my talks for exactly these reasons. Oh. That's fine. Anyway, it doesn't come quite across as it is, but surely we can see that the movement is very expressive, which is the point of the story. The point that I really want to make here is, which we can't hear very well, but the point that I want to make is that one thing that is part of dance, which is very important too, are the sounds. And here the expression of the movement comes from the breathing of the women doing this sort of very expressive kind of movement. It's something we need to think about as well. And I'm not going to talk about work on that at the moment, so we're going to stop that now. We're also going to stop that. And we're going to stop that too. That's for later, if I can be bothered to go through all of this again. All right, back to our talk. So this is expressive movement. This is one definition of dance, and this relates very much to all these ideas about kinesthetic empathy, about me experiencing the movements that are being on stage. So this is these kinds of theories work well for these kinds of dances. A very different approach to what dance might be, and one of the very rare examples of a psychological definition of what dance might be, comes from a book called Psychology of the Arts, where I actually have to thank Helmut Leder for, who sort of alerted me to this one in the first place. And Kreitler define dance as movements that are remote from the habitual. So central to this definition of dance is the idea, what distinguishes dance from ordinary movements that we do anyway all the time? And from their idea, it's exactly that it is movements that we do not do all the time. So those ideas capture very idea that dance is about virtuosity. This theory fits very well with Emily's findings on that, it is about not being able to do what makes things very attractive. And also William Forsythe's work fits much better into this kind of work, because he doesn't necessarily care so much about what's being expressed. He cares much more about formal principles of dance. It's basically a formalist approach, and he cares about breaking the grammar, for example, of ballet and deconstructing what these different dance styles are. So he's not so much cared about intentions and what's being communicated. He cares about the structure and the composition of dance and what that might be and how we can challenge that. Now here's a definition from anthropology, and this is from a book called To Dance is Human: A Theory of Nonverbal Communication. So we're going to go back to the idea of communication very soon. And so Judith Hanna, who wrote this book and who's written extensively about the anthropology of dance, argues that dance is human behavior that is composed of purposeful, intentionally rhythmical, culturally patterned sequences of nonverbal movement other than ordinary motor activities, the motion having inherent anesthetic value. So it's already getting quite complicated here. We find some ideas, so it's the idea that music or rhythm somehow is central, that it is not an ordinary motor activity, and for the first time that it has an aesthetic purpose in the first place. If we move now away from the 80s, it gets very difficult to find any definitions of what dance is in the first place, and I think that's because at that point of time and through postmodernism, it becomes really difficult to define anything. And this, if we move to nowadays composition of what dance and choreographers might is, the idea that it requires a body, the idea that requires movement, the idea that there is anything special about dance other than the fact that it is composed and intended, is really being deconstructed. And that is summarized, I think, nice in this quote with Jonathan Burrows, who's currently works in or who teaches a lot at Parts in Brussels. And for him, dance and choreography really just is about composition. It's about the right things in the right order. And it doesn't really matter whether it has a body or whether it doesn't have a body. So these things all become really relative. So if defining what dance is doesn't really help us or doesn't really get us very far, maybe as scientists we get further if we ask, well, how does dance work? And we proposed a couple of years ago a model or a way of thinking about how dance works that is based on communication theory. So from that point of view, the minimum or like the necessary and sufficient condition of a dance performance is that there is one person who moves and another person who watches. And what happens is that while this one person moves and another person watches, communication happens between the performer and the spectator. And this communication occurs via movement. And then perhaps the most controversial or challenging or novel idea about this is that the aesthetic appreciation of dance really is linked to the effective communication between performer and spectator. And that's what it is. Yeah? So the idea of communication in experimental aesthetics is obviously not a new one. So Berline explicitly builds his work on Shannon's information theory. And a lot of the initial stylities use bits or information, computations of bits as a measure of information that is being transmitted. But what I think is new to this idea, and perhaps what is different from, but happy to be corrected, most or even all other theoretical models of experimental psychology is that in dance or in the performing arts, there is no artistic object that is being evaluated. And I think this idea is very nicely summarized in an essay from 1999, which is kind of the manifesto of performance artists ever since. And so Peggy Phelan argues in this essay that performance and performance art honors the idea that a limited number of people in a specific time, space, and frame can have an experience of value which leaves no visible trace afterward. Another way of putting this is performance's life is in the present. Performance cannot be saved, recorded, documented, or otherwise participate in the circulation of representations, and once it does so, it becomes something other than performance. So to the degree that performance attempts to enter the economy of reproduction, it betrays and lessens the promise of its own ontology. So performance being, like the ontology of subjectivity proposed here, becomes itself through disappearance. So disappearance and absence is central to the idea of performance. And that, of course, is a huge challenge for an experimental approach to performance because it really suggests that this is a single trial experience. So how can we study the performance aesthetics if it only ever happens once? If we can't do it again, it's already gone. If we record it, if we show a video, it's already something else. So how can we find an experimental approach to studying what makes the performance, the live performance, the dance performance, but also theater, acting, and music concerts special? So we propose this sort of three elements. So let's have a closer look at this kind of idea that dance performance is about communication between performer and spectator. So there is no artistic object anymore, but what there is are the individual and the collective dynamics of movement, through which the performer communicates. And what's interesting is that information obviously doesn't just flow, at least in the live situation, not from performers to spectators, but it also flows back from spectators to performers. And this can be as subtle as clapping, or like at the end of the performance, or laughter, whether you like it or not, but it can also be silence, like an audience that doesn't respond at all to what you're doing on stage really impacts on the performers and what they're doing. And it takes more direct and more importance when we move to perhaps modern ideas of participatory performance, or gallery installations where the work of Tino Segal, for example, for those who know it, so where the spectators and the visitors of the museum really become part of the creation of the artwork itself. So those ideas become more important when we move to the live performance. I'm not going to talk much about individual movement dynamics, so Emily has already introduced it. Luckily, I have two different videos, so I'm going to show those two. So the work, this is collaboration with Emily and Andrea, and there's a poster out there, and we look at how different individual movement dynamics impact on aesthetic experience. But just to, again, anticipate what the main story of my talk is, I think these kinds of principles do not just apply to the performing arts, we can find them in other areas as well. And so this is work by Becky Chamberlain, which I'm very happy to be involved with as well. But it's really her work, and she studies artificial computer-generated graffiti traces. And what's nice about these computer-generated graffiti traces is that we can use different computational modes of motor control to generate these graffiti traces. For example, the minimum jerk model, and then we can look at, well, how do these different plausible or implausible models of motor control impact on the aesthetic experience? So again, there's a poster out there after this talk. Please have a look. So I want to focus this talk on the collective movement dynamics, and then we'll have a video again, which is not YouTube, luckily. So we're going to have a look at that. This is the rugby final 2015, New Zealand versus Australia. And I'm going to ask you to answer who won the match. Yeah, I really love this video. I use it in all my talks, especially when I talk to audiences that are not very familiar with what dance is, because in one go it clears up all prejudices that we might have, particularly in our Western understanding of what dance is. There are no lightly dressed women here. There is no lightness. No one's doing splits. No one's doing turns. It's very masculine. It's very different from what we think of what dance might be. And I think what's even more important is where this comes from. So this is, for those of you who know it, this is the haka, and it is a Maori ritual, and it's actually a war dance. And this, I think, is really important, because the intended emotion for you as an spectator to experience has nothing to do with entertainment. The purpose of this dance is to induce fear in you. Yeah? You don't want to mess with us as a group, and this is where we're going to take the discussion also a little bit. What's interesting also is that different audiences have different aesthetic responses to this. So the opposing team clearly is irritated or perhaps bored, maybe a bit fearful, at least they don't know what to do with it. But the audiences around it surely the fans of the New Zealand team, they cheer and they do get pleasure from this. So, which is interesting, so the aesthetic outcome of what's being communicated here differs according to what your relation to the group who is performing is. And that is going to become very central later. So the carrier of the messages in this case is synchrony. And synchrony is a really interesting thing to look at, I think. First of all, because it actually is a principle of perceptual organization. It is a Gestalt law. And if we look at comparative, like to the work on symmetry, for example, there is very little work out there on synchrony at all. So there's very few people who study what synchrony does and how it is aesthetically perceived. Synchrony is also interesting because there is a lot of work from evolutionary psychology, and it's a very well sort of established effect now, that moving in synchrony or acting in synchrony with others seems to produce group bonding. So it increases in groups cooperation and rapport, it increases mutual liking between the performers, it increases feelings of togetherness and similarity, and it also increases measures of cooperation and conformity. So there's a downside to that as well. So synchrony produces both an in-group as well as an out-group. And there are now a couple of studies which have looked specifically on how this happens in dance. So what these studies, most of these studies don't do, there's two things that these studies don't do. So the first thing is they never measure actually whether people were moving in synchrony or not. So it's always an instruction, but there's no measurement of the actual synchrony that people have. The second thing is none of these studies look at the idea that synchrony communicates or signals something, that synchrony is maybe a very efficient way to communicate coalition quality between groups, which is what we see as an example here. And there's not much research on this out there, but I want to show you, for example, the idea that synchrony emerges as a function of you working, as a function of expertise of groups, of people working together for a long time, is perhaps quite prominent. And here's a video from the NRA, which I think is really nice. So these are basketball teams. So there's no dance here. NBA, NRA, oh, sorry, yeah, NBA. I don't watch much basketball. Anyway, I'm missing that. So here, clearly this synchrony is not intended. It's not something that the groups wanted to do. It just happens because these people work together constantly and all the time. And yeah, so that's just something that happens. And I think just on the notion of movement as remoteness from the habitual, my argument would be that the beauty or the sudden beauty that you experience by watching this comes from the fact, exactly from the fact that this is not dance, or that these are sort of casual movements that you wouldn't expect to be performed with such accuracy together. So here's the why question for Marcos. Why do we dance? And there are at least three ideas from evolutionary psychology as to why we might dance. The first one is to attract mates, so ultimately to find a partner. The second one, which we just talked about, is to bond with others. But we also need to entertain the idea that dance really has no evolutionary function at all, that it is just a byproduct of, let's say, acquiring the capacity to language, to socially interact. So there may not be anything special about dance at all. And to look at these questions, we conducted two studies. The first one focused on performers, and we wanted to know, well, does group affiliation really relate to performing synchrony? So not just telling people be in synchrony, but actually measuring how synchronous people are. And if so, what kind of synchrony is responsible for these bonding effects? And then the second study has a focus on aesthetic perception, and there we want to look at, well, does perceiving synchrony now predict the aesthetic experience of a contemporary Western dance live performance? So nothing ritualistic, nothing but really something remote in a theater, and can we explain aesthetic perception as a function of synchrony? And we worked with Canadian choreographer Matthias Sperling on this, for the first experiment and the second one. And this is a video from the first study. So we developed 3 tasks that our participants performed, and you can't hear him, so I'm going to explain it as well. So these tasks are very simple. There's like very easy things to do, even for novice participants. And the first task is the circle task. So what all participants do, they have to have a little circle on the floor, which they imagine, and they can do 3 things. They can change the size of the circle, they can change the speed at which the circle travels, and they can travel the circle through space, but they still have to keep the circle. So there are 3 variables that they can play with, and we ask them to alter these, by yourself. Second task is the falling task. The falling task is like very contemporary dance, so you do this, you fall, and again, we tell everyone, please explore this, please what to do with this. And the third task is the swinging task, where you just swing your arms, and we don't need to talk about that, but let's just focus on these two tasks to begin with. And the nice thing about these tasks is, and this is why it's great to work with a choreographer on this, that we can now create synchronous versions of these tasks which are matched for the overall movements that are actually being done, which have everything the same except for whether they are performed as a group or not. And we were very careful in avoiding in the instructions any references to do this together, do this as a group. We never say we. We explain those tasks purely in the spatial temporal features of what people have to do. So there's now one circle in the room, or there is one fall in the room. Yeah? So we don't make any references to cooperation or that they have to collaborate to do this. And you can see that all our participants wear these wristbands, and those are accelerometers who also do a bit of psychophysiology, and we'll get back to that later. And we use these accelerometers to compute from all our participants acceleration profiles, and this is what the two conditions look like. So the upper one is moving on your own, and the other one is moving in synchrony, and each of these colors is one person. And you can see that for the synchronous condition, these curves overlap, and for the low one, they don't overlap. And what we then can do, doing this, here's a bit of data. So we did 10 groups overall. It was an incredible logistic nightmare to do this over the course of one weekend, and we had sort of 80 people in total to do this. And then what we can do is we can use cross-recurrence analysis to compute how much people move, which is simply a spectral analysis of the power of these time series. And we can look at the overlap of acceleration profiles using cross-recurrence analysis, which is a kind of cross-correlation, essentially. And by doing that, we can also ask nice questions about, well, what kind of synchrony now is important for these social bondings effect? And if we look at overlap at a leg 0, then what we get is what we call in dance unison movement, so really doing the same thing at the same time. If we do stuff at legs greater than 0, we get movements like this, which are still synchronized, but which are no longer the same thing at the same time. They're coupled movements, which we call distributed coordination rather than unitary synchrony. And this is what we find. So we had an hour of the workshop tasks, and then it was a double-blind study. We sent all our participants to like another room where we had mean social psychologists running all kinds of like tests on them. And here are the sort of main findings. So indeed, we find that synchrony is related to measures of group affiliation, average liking of group members, but the important thing is what matters is not that whether people do the same thing at the same time. What matters is whether people couple their movement with others or not. And this also works, so this is my favorite task, which is a measure of conformity. So we had people showing questions like this and asking, which color is this? Is it green or is it yellow? And then people walk in the room to a huge Likert scale on the wall, and we don't really care about what they say, which color this is. What we care about is how close do they stand together. And what we find is those people that were moving more in synchrony with each other in the group, they indeed tend to stick together closer in answering these questions. So indeed, the conformity of the group is related to how synchronous people are. Moving to aesthetic perception of synchrony. So here, again, we worked with Matthias, moving away from performers. So we show like, yes, synchrony does indeed signal performer or group cohesion in groups. So what does it do to spectators? So for this one, we worked now with 10 professional performers. And again, we use the same, so the choreography is in half an hour work without music, again, very pedestrian movement styles. And what the performers do is, in this case, it's a task-based choreography. So that means we don't specify the exact sequences of movements or steps that people to make. What the performers do is we tell them, start the falling task, and then increase to a more synchronous stage until everyone falls together. Do that in your own timing, and when everyone falls together, the next section of the choreography starts. Yeah, so it's a slightly different idea about how choreography and dance works than what we normally see. The reason why we chose these rather pedestrian movements is because, as Bea and Emily have shown, whether people have familiarity with the movement vocabulary that they are observing has a huge effect on their aesthetic experience. So by taking rather everyday, so postmodern kind of movement vocabularies, we can make sure that people have similar motor and visual experience with the movements that they are seeing, because we wanted to focus on the effect of synchrony. So you can see that now it's sort of increasing and they become falling more and more together here. But we're not going to wait until they do all of it. Now I think this was pretty good. And I think they'll do one more time and then they'll stop. But I think for illustration purposes, we can move on. So in this participant, again, we ran this over a weekend. So we performed this work 5 times. We had 5 performances, 1 pilot performances as a technical pilot where everything went wrong, which it did, and then 4 performances that we actually analyzed. And again, we used the wrist sensors to record acceleration and compute synchrony from our performers, this time from our group of 10 performers. But we also put these wrist sensors onto all of our spectators in these performances. And for them, we measure as an index of heart rate. And a subset of performers also get tablet computers, not unlike the ones that we saw in the lab yesterday. And we asked them to make 2 judgments, actually. So the first one, we wanted to know, because like operationalizing synchrony as the overlap of acceleration profiles and non-overlapping time windows using cross-recurrence analysis is not necessarily an intuitive definition of what synchrony is. So we wanted to know, does it actually map onto what people think moving together means? So we wanted to know, do people think there is synchrony or there is no synchrony? And then on the y-axis, we also asked them, do you enjoy what you're seeing? Do you not what you're seeing? And we had sort of an extensive practice session at the beginning. We told our people this is work in progress. So we tried to make this a real non-experimental experience by saying this work is in progress. What you're saying now is going to contribute to making the final version of this work. And we practiced how they should do this. And in the end, they were quite good at doing this. So what this does, it gives us, or it provides us with a number of time series. So the 3 of the red ones here are the ones that come from performers, and the blue ones are the ones from spectators. And the first thing what I want to point out, so these are the time series for the first performance, and the first thing I want to point out that our explicit measures of perceived togetherness or perceived synchrony do not map well onto our actual measurement of synchrony. So when you ask people, do you move together, do you not move together, what they really judge is how much movement there is, not how synchronous people were. And we can talk about later why that is. And then you get these bewildering data set here, but we're going to break it down a little bit, focusing back on our main hypothesis. So our main hypothesis is, just to return to that, does synchrony as a social signal predict aesthetic pleasure that people get from watching the dance? And just descriptively, it seems that it does. So particularly here, in the sort of last 10 minutes of the performance, you get little peaks of synchrony, and for each peak of synchrony, you do get a peak in enjoyment as well. But you also have things happening like this, where the relationship is not really clear, or like a sort of gradually increase in chaos or randomness of the movements is actually quite enjoyable. So there's no one-to-one direction between, it's not a clear prediction, not like more synchrony, more pleasure. It depends on what's being done and some contextual effects. But the key thing is, it does seem predictive. But we obviously want to test that statistically as well, and we do use Granger causality to do that. And just to illustrate briefly, because I'm running out of time, what Granger causality does, it basically predicts, it helps us to predict whether a time series on one moment predicts a time series at a later point in time. And we compare, let's say, whether the enjoyment signal over time predicts itself, and if we add synchrony to that, does synchrony plus enjoyment predict enjoyment better than enjoyment alone? So this is basically the logic of this. And what we can do by this, we can ask a number of questions. So we can firstly ask, well, at what time delay does this happen? So how long does it take for people to respond to a change in synchrony? The second thing we can do is, which is central to the idea of live performance, we can ask for performance specificity. So because we have a number of performances, we can take the data, the synchrony from one performance, from a random one, and use to predict aesthetic judgments of another performance. Now this is crucial because if data from one performance predicts the data of another performance, then this means that it is more about the structural compositional elements of the performance rather than direct immediate communication between performance and spectators. If the communication is specific, then that shouldn't happen. And finally, we can look at directionality. So we can synchrony, because we know our spectators don't know what they're seeing, synchrony should predict enjoyment, but enjoyment shouldn't predict synchrony. And I'm going to quickly run through these findings very briefly. So this is for performance number 3. And you can indeed see, so these are the enjoyment ratings. You can see that synchrony indeed does predict enjoyment, egg legs of 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 seconds. And this happens only in the direction of synchrony predicting enjoyment. It doesn't happen for the reverse, and it is specific to data from the same performance. So a randomly mismatched performance does not produce these Granger causal relationships. And this same finding holds for our heart rate data. So again, synchrony predicts heart rate, but only if the synchrony is from the same performance. And the same thing happens for the first performance. Now, we're doing experiments here in live theater environments. So it was great if the story was that simple, but unfortunately it isn't, because if we look at the other 2 performances, then we do find this sort of weird, paradoxical, inverse relationships. But I think the crucial thing here is that there is nothing in the heart rate data, which is, I think, quite nice in that respect. So the behavioral data are a bit all over the place and predictive, but we don't find anything in the heart rate data. The good news, though, is if we actually do sort of bivariate models of autoregressive modeling, then for all these 4 performances, we do find that synchrony improves the fit of the model. Like it increases, it reduces the AICC, whereas acceleration and visual change, which we compute directly from the video, I should have said that. So this is a sort of measure of pixel change, which we compute from the video rather than from the accelerometers. That sort of does not help to improve our model. But where do these huge differences come from between these performances? And obviously, one explanation is maybe it is just a contextual thing, because there are always slight differences between performances, and it's a very ecologically valid, but perhaps not so well-controlled environment. But actually, there is no, like the performer variables, there are no significant differences between these 2. And so we had a slightly different idea about where these differences come from, and this becomes clear if we look at the distribution of enjoyment ratings over the performances. And then we see that performance 1, for example, was overall not enjoyed, so people didn't like what they were seeing, and performance 3 was overall enjoyed, and the other 2 are somewhere in between. So people sort of oscillate between positive and negative judgments, but they don't really never get to a stable response. So for the ones where we do get a stable response, we do find these Granger causal relationships between explicit and implicit ratings. So we think that dynamic synchrony does predict implicit and explicit aesthetic responses, but only if spectators form a strong and stable, and I'm borrowing from Theresa May here, strong and stable aesthetic response. Now, I think I've got 5 minutes. I think I might go to, I'm a bit over. I've got 5. No, okay. But then I'll leave the imaging data out. Maybe if you have questions on the fMRI experiment, that is very central. So I'm just going to show that. What I wanted to say is that we did a follow-up fMRI study with experts and novices, where we use intersubject correlations to look at how similar are people's brain responses when they watch this entire dance before this in the scanner. And all I want to say is that dancers' responses, professional dancers' responses, are more similar than those that of novices. So experts, when they watch these kinds of performances, produce more similar brain activity than novices. So what that means is that watching dance, if you are an expert, your brain synchronizes more than when you're not an expert. And this is the last thing that I want to say on the idea of effective communication. So this is behavioral data that we collected in a follow-up session a week later. What I really like about this is if you look at the time series of enjoyment rate between novices and dancers, you don't see much of a difference. But we also collected data from our choreographer. So this is his predicted enjoyment ratings. It's a matter of dramaturgy, as it were. And if we correlate the ratings of the experts with the ratings of the choreographer, then this produces a positive correlation. When we correlate the data of the novices with the choreographer, it gets a negative correlation. And there is not much differences in the mean. So what expertise really does, it makes people align better with what the choreographer intended. Yeah? And we only see that if we look at the time series data, and it's not present in discrete judgments. Synchrony is also the best predictor of this. So we can record these things, but I don't really have time to go through all of this. So basically what I want to say is I think based on dance, what we have here is perhaps a potential mechanism of how these very intense aesthetic experiences come about that we experience in live situations. So for example, this is Glastonbury, a concert. So I think what this data suggests is there is synchrony happening on stage. So those are expert performers, they synchronize with each other in what they're doing, but there's also synchronization happening in the audience. So people enjoy what they're doing and they're synchronized, they sing along, they move together, and these sorts of synchrony, again, entrains to what the performers do. And it's this sort of feed-forward loop of synchronization with everyone which perhaps underlies these very special and immersive and massive experiences that we get, and why we pay these tickets for huge £100 to do this. And I think there's another nice intricate implication in this which relates to the absence of the artistic objects. So you buy your tickets for Glastonbury before you even know who's playing. Yeah? So you don't go to see a specific thing, you go for that synchronization experience. And it doesn't essentially really matter which band is playing. What matters is this, that's the provocative version, it doesn't really matter what's playing. The artistic, there's no object there. What matters is the experience, it's the sharing of synchronization. So just to wrap up, perhaps some more provocative, performative principles in visual neuroaesthetics, mixing some of the findings from these two experiments with some ideas from performance studies and theater studies. So I would argue that aesthetic appreciation can also be understood as experience sharing, and this experience sharing is perhaps more effective in experts than between novices, and that excludes the expert artists. So this may be one mechanism about how and why experts differ in their aesthetic judgments than novices. Aesthetic appreciation is a process, it's not an outcome, so we need to, if we want to understand the performing arts, we need to look at the temporal domain, we need to use continuous judgment, because only these can capture the dynamic nature of the performing arts. And more generally, I think what the performing arts help us see is that we need to understand what happens when things vanish, when there is something not there, when we have aesthetic experience of things that we expect to be there but are no longer there. So I think they can help us to get to an aesthetics of disappearance and address the idea that life experiences are not reproducible. So I hope I've included you like one way of how we might get around the idea that aesthetics happen as a single trial thing. And then finally, I think we need to think about ideas of participation and immersion. I think these performative principles can help us do that. So what happens and what is important is what happens if the spectator participates in generating the artwork, and what happens in these immersive environments where you synchronize with the environment and with other people. And I want to say this is not just relevant to dance and performance, but these kind of participatory principles are increasingly used in museums as well, where you don't just stand and watch an artwork, but you try to draw it, which is effectively a performative engagement with the artwork. Thank you very much. I think not too bad. Final thing, please, we are starting a new Master's in the Psychology of Arts and Neuroaesthetics at Goldsmiths. We're very excited about this. If you have students who want to study, who probably want to specialize in that area, please make them aware of that course. We're really excited about it. We're taking in students for the first time in October, and we're actually recruiting very well. It's a truly interdisciplinary program, so we have psychologists and we have people with humanities backgrounds. So if you get approached by people who want to do a PhD with you, but who don't have the scientific background to do that, send them to us. Thank you very much.